Hi, YouTube. So, I've been feeling a lot of feels and malcontent, right? I'm not the type that likes to stew in malcontent, however. I'm not that person, so, look at this, look what I just found. CLEP, College Algebra, Exam Guide. So, I want to confess about the nature of my character, especially because this is a return to YouTube and everything, and it's not really the first or only time that I've been on here, and I had crashed out the first time. But the truth about me, is that I do have a lot of fiery anger, but I'm more like the intelligent rebel. As a hacker, I've often spent time studying the system to look for things that I can exploit about college, and yeah, the CLEP exams are something I can exploit. It saves me money, and I can, draft them a letter saying, well, you didn't get paid this time because I object to calendar-based obstruction instead of mastery obstruction. You didn't get paid, and I managed to brute my way through it anyways. If an institution wants my money, it should adapt to service me through mastery-based instruction. And so here I am asking Ken Migo, the question for how to graph. I just went to the store, let me turn on the camera here on this application that I've been learning to use. I know it's blurry and you can barely see me, but see what I went and got. Docket Gold and everything, and I'm going to open it up. And here we are, to study on Khan Academy. Unfortunately, you can't see the lines, but it's graphing paper. It's too blurry. I'm sorry. I don't know why the manufacturers have been making such shitty laptop cameras. Maybe I should go out and get a good HD one and run it over USB for this channel. Anyways, that may be a good bit of creative criticism, and maybe I could get a good microphone at some point for my listeners. I don't like it. I don't like having to spend that money, but maybe I will be a little bit better heard on a microphone. But yeah, I'm upset. I mean, I paid to go to college and everything, and I know there are some people like, well, you're a pleb. You don't realize anything good. Very opinionated people here on this particular platform about the value of education and everything. A lot of people don't believe in college. And you know what? I gotta say, kind viewer, I spent time in the halls of academia again, and I walked away from the experience a little bit disenchanted myself because I saw it up close, and the one thing that I was left with was that this doesn't really feel like an institution of learning, really, at the end of the day. Now, I will give you, there's a lot of good things that I could say about the class and everything and what I went through. I'm not here to come across as ungrateful, because the truth of the matter is that I am immensely grateful for the resources that were available for me for help. PCC is great because they have a tutoring department. It's open from 10 to 5. You can get in and get some help for questions that you have if it comes up, and they will work with you through this stuff. The problem wasn't that these resources were not available, they just were not sufficient for me. I encountered a math course that just simply was moving too quickly, way ahead, of my pace and everything. And, but when I was in there, what I found especially damning was that, I would come in from the tutoring department, right? I would come in and I would be right up there, and I would see the other students doing equations on the math board and everything, and all of them need help. And I look and I count, and I start seeing how many people show up and they're doing equations on the board. It's almost everyone. Like maybe one or two people filter in a couple of minutes later, just as class starts, but that's it. It's pretty much everybody is struggling in this. Almost the entire student body is struggling with this particular this course. Almost nobody's getting it. So despite the fact that I dropped, I can't imagine a lot of other people stayed. And if they did, if they passed, and everything in this scenario, that we're in that classroom, because everybody was having trouble. I was so engaged that I was shaping my whole life around being a student. I went in and I woke up, and when I woke up, I would go in at 10, to get in at 10. Right then, when tutoring started, I would work my way there until 1 p.m., and then I would go to class, and then I would come back, between then and my 3 o'clock Japanese courses and everything. And I would be there the whole time, and then I would come in the very next days on Tuesdays and Thursdays too. Same thing. Working the whole thing because I had that 2 p.m. writing course as a full-time student. Right. It was a very drastic transition for me to go from being a full-time slacker to a full-time student. It was pretty brutal. I resolved myself that I wasn't going to do that again the next time through. I decided that just wasn't for me because I didn't like how it completely monopolized my free time and everything. I mean, I did think it made sense to give school some, but I didn't want to give it all of my free time anymore. I didn't want to be a full-time student anymore. So anyways, I just went to the store and I got the graphing paper. I've been working my way through Khan Academy, and you can see, what I'm working on. And I obviously screenshotted this so that I can look this up by, whenever I want, and everything. And so I can see that no worries to graph, write your equation like this: y equals mx plus b. M is the slope, so we can see how steep the line is, and b is the y-intercept where the line crosses the y-axis. So we know what those variables are, but anyways, so that I can go from equation to the graph, to graph from an equation onto the graph. So that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do. So I got a graphing paper and everything to do this and everything. And so, I'm there. I'm doing this work and everything, and studying Khan Academy and everything, and you can see my progress and everything, and I'm apparently working functions and inverse functions as our first unit. So here I am, and a new day, and here I am almost proficient in half the course, in 48% at this point. And so I'm moving towards the unit test at this point and getting pretty good at it already and everything, and I'm realizing that I don't suck at math. I'm just out of practice, so to speak. I haven't been doing it for a while, so I got to get back into it. That's all. And but it leaves me in a state of malcontent. But I know that the way that I'm talking, I'm like, but there's a lot of caveats here and everything. When I get mad, it's true that I tend to go online and I might say something like, oh, this system doesn't deserve compliant students, it deserves arsonists, and everything. But I want you to know, in having said something like that I have no intention of actually carrying out any of that sort of thing. That is just so, I don't want to end up in prison sort of reaction to it. I'm too rational to go out and do that sort of violence. You know what I'm saying? And so but having that feeling inside of me is good, though, because I've spent a lot of years. I've been around for a while. I'm nearly 40. I've put a few holes in a few walls. I've smashed a few computers in rage at somebody else and everything. And the years have taught me to breathe, when you feel that anger, to do the breathing exercises, and everything, and to find a way to cope with it. And that every time that I've gotten mad in the recent past, I've managed to get something accomplished with it that didn't, so much result in destruction of anybody else, or even myself. We just ended up, I guess, beating the system in a way for it. Anyways, the point about me is that I'm more like the intelligent, hacker. So I look at the system, I see that you can take the CLEP exams on these things and test out of it and everything. And I'm thinking about to myself, college sucks. It's flawed. They're not. They set students up to fail, and then they blame the students. I didn't get my money's worth on about this whole thing, but I will give PCC, good on you. In fact, good on you for having a STEAM department where somebody can just come in and have access to a soldering iron. It's pretty great. Good on you for having a system where people can come in and check out equipment for the assignments that they need. A voice recorder, access to the technologies that they need. We never had that kind of thing when I was growing up in the K through 12 system. We had a cast rep system that never had the money it needed to teach the students much of anything. And you know what? I like it overall. I liked being there. I liked being part of that crowd. The problem is I just couldn't get enough goddamn help on my math courses. So, I'm angry at it. I'm angry at the process. I'm angry at, the idea of doing this by, classroom-based instruction. I'm angry because I'm reading books now and seeing what mathematicians are saying, and what mathematicians are saying, is essentially stop being afraid to make a mistake. Well, when you have a fucking... When most people, in the context that most people are learning math in, is in, college or in a classroom, what you end up with is a situation where, those students end up terrified to make a mistake. They end up with paralysis. They end up looking and staring at the board, afraid to, even input what the teacher wants them to do, or even take a chance of inputting anything on the paper, because they can't be wrong, because the teacher will deduct points for that. So they stop taking risk and they shut down and disengage with the process and everything. And that's what so many mathematicians have said. Stop being afraid to make a mistake. But what does our system do? It teaches students in math to fear making a mistake. That's what it does. And so if nobody can ever be wrong, nobody will take a chance on anything, to be wrong and to realize they were wrong and then go back and fix their mistake and learn from fixing their mistake. Nobody will. That will not happen for the process of it. And so we are setting people up to think, for instance, I'm just not a math person. I'm just a failure, at this sort of thing. I'm not meant for this sort of thing. And none of this is true. None of these things happen to be true. The truth is that the pacing of college math is just too brutally fast. The truth of the matter is that really they say it's 11 weeks, but let's do the fucking realization about how much time we spent in class. Alright, so basically they say it's 11 weeks, but 11 weeks is 77 days, right? What days of the week are PCC open on? Monday through Thursday. They take a 3-day weekend every week. So that means, the whole thing is shut down for 3 weeks. Or that's not 3 weeks, but it's shut down for basically 3 of the days every single week. So essentially what that means is right out the gate, you can chop off 33 days out of that 77 days. So because 11 times 7 for 11 weeks, and every week has 7 days, and so that amounts to 77. So you go and you take that, right, and you subtract from that, the fact that for 33 of those days, because for every week there's 3 days that are taken out of where the school is just closed down. Well, now you got to take 2 more out as well, because that 22 is days where math class isn't even in session, right? So that would be Tuesday and Thursday that they're not in session. And what you're left with is, from that, you've taken 55 days out of 77, which leaves you with 22 days. 22 days over that, distributed out over the entire 11 weeks. Are you actually in math class, right? And those days, right, you only spend about 2 hours in that course, maybe an hour and a half in there. That's the limit of about the time that you will be in there, and sometimes it's even shorter in there, getting instruction on the blackboard and the stuff that he wants to put us through. I was hyper engaged. I didn't have anything better to do. I don't have a bunch of friends to hang out with, as an alternative. I don't have any of that stuff because I've been shuffled around all over the country. So, I do have friends, but none of them are local. Or I suppose I have friends from the political activism I've done locally, but I don't have very many, and they're Colby and the rest of them, they distant at this point, We don't hang out often anymore, now that Wolfpack isn't meeting for those sort of assemblies, so I haven't seen him for quite some time, Anyways, so I don't have people that are a social life down here in Oregon, so what do? I shape my life around going to college, because there's nothing better to do. There's nobody to really call up and ask, you want to call up a bro to hang out with him and such. I don't have any of that stuff. So I start going to class, because it's like, what am I doing with my life at this point? I don't have friends anymore. So, because I used to maybe down here, but I haven't spoken to any of them in 30 years. So, I'm back in Oregon after having been gone for quite some time and everything. I'm trying to rebuild my life, so I'm just taking baby steps back into the real world and community and, So anyways, I really struggled with math. I was showing up every day that it was in thing. In fact, for the whole 4 days, I was showing up in that tutoring department at 10 a.m. to work for as long as I could on those math courses, and I was still struggling. And good on PCC for having tutoring. Good on them for having a STEAM department. Good on them for letting students check out technology equipment and everything. Good on them for all these things. And all of it, it wasn't like the institution wasn't trying to offer help. It just wasn't sufficient, I availed myself of every resource that I possibly could. I was devoting my life at that point to being a student and to actually studying because there just wasn't anything better to do with my time. I mean, I could blow it off and play some video games and watch some anime, but that was a fundamentally solitary activity, so there really wasn't fucking anything better to do with my time. And so I started studying, because that was just the most productive use of my time. And, here I was bombing the math course, and that's my story. That's my frustration in all of it. 30 kids, none of them are probably going to pass, all of them fail. And the system keeps saying it's our fault. We're the failure, or it wants us to intuit this idea that we're not math people. Well, I have come along and I'm saying no, that ain't the case. I am a math person. The whole problem is just I suck at learning math in school. But that doesn't mean I can't learn it. So I'm working my way through Khan Academy and at the Texas, so let's look at it. Course mastery is 2% so far, so that's not a lot, but I've only been doing it for a couple of days. I haven't even gotten through the first unit, but I'm going to do it. That is a commitment at this point. So Algebra 2, let me see, aligned with the Texas Knowledge and Skills text. This algebra course strengthens understanding of functions, equations, inequality, data models. Students will explore key concepts such as polynomial operations, exponential and logarithmic functions, rational expressions, and systems of equations, all through real-world applications and interactive practice with engaging lessons, instructional videos, and step-by-step problems. This course supports deep mathematical reasoning and prepares students for future success. Let's get started. So, anyways, I have begun. I went to the store to show some commitment to it. I got the graphing paper to transfer things to the graph on my own because I am mad. I'm mad, and Salman Khan has taught me, that mastery-based instruction is far more effective than what they are teaching in those fucking courses in those rooms. And so, I have decided to take matters into my own hands and to live my own life. And you know what? I'm going to grab the system by the balls and everything. I'm going to make it do what I want it to do. I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to get these skills. And I'm not going to let the fact that those courses aren't very effective at teaching stop me. But the one thing I'm not doing it because that's what they want me to do, is go back right in and pay for Math 65 all over again and take the course a second time. That is not happening, my friends. That is typical student behavior. That's what they typically do. But I am a completely different person than that kind of mentality. That is not me. That is not how I've ever been and everything. And because I am, in fact, a hacker, I have identified the fact that there is a testing facility down in Chemika, at Chemika Community College down there in Salem, and that is a bit of a trip from where I live. But let's be realistic, PCC's Rock Creek campus is also a bit of a trip from where I live. It's a bit of a ways away from my place. And so, been going through all this, and I've been having these problems, and I've been having this, and didn't learn it much in that course. I guess I did get a bit of foil practice. So there's that. So I learned how to foil it out a lot of ways. And so first, inner, outer, I forget. So first, outer, inner, last. So there, I figured it out. Anyways, so you get to foil it out to distribute it out in that manner and everything. So I've got some knowledge. I've been doing the work. I've been engaged. I've been studying and all this other stuff. So don't tell me I'm not a math person. Don't make me think that way. That's not true. I just am not able to do it in a college classroom. In that context specifically, I have a lot of problems, especially because in a college classroom, I can't make a mistake. My professor will deduct points. That creates anxiety, That means I'm too scared to put in anything because I might get it wrong.